The sun bled orange over the Chihuahuan desert, painting the cracked earth in hues of fire and dust. Colt McGraw leaned against the warped fence of his family's ranch, a 200-acre stubborn patch of West Texas that clung to life like a bull rider to a bucking beast. His shoulder throbbed, a souvenir from a bull named Diablo who'd tossed him like a rag doll last season. But he ignored it, same as he ignored the bank notices piling up in the glove box of his '98 Chevy pickup. The land stretched before him, all mesquite and hardpan, whispering memories of his father's calloused hands and his mother's soft hymns. "The land raised me," Colt muttered, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Now I gotta raise it back." At 32, Colt was carved from grit and regret. His Stetson, stained with sweat and time, sat low over eyes that saw too much. Cattle prices plummeting, the bank's vulture-like patience, the way folks in Presidio whispered about the McGraw's fall. His shoulder, held together by pins and pride, ached with every move, but quitting wasn't in his blood. By day, he mended fences and herded the few head of cattle left. Weekends, he climbed onto bulls that could kill him, chasing purses that never covered the bills. Nights, he drove Uber through the border town's neon-lit veins, ferrying drunks and dreamers while the ranch bled money. It was a life of bone-deep exhaustion, but it was his. The ranch house, a sagging relic of better days, crouched at the edge of the property. Its paint peeled like old skin, and the porch creaked under Colt's boots as he headed inside for coffee. The kitchen smelled of stale beer and leather. A framed photo hung crooked on the wall. His father, Amos McGraw, grinning beside a prize steer. Back when the ranch was a name folks respected. Amos had died 5 years ago. Heart attack in the barn, leaving Colt a legacy of debt and a promise to keep the land. His mother was gone too, cancer taking her when he was 10. The weight of their absence was a wound Colt carried like a brand. He'd failed them once, selling off half the herd to cover a bad loan after his dad's death. He wouldn't fail again. Outside, a dust cloud announced a visitor. A battered Ford pulled up, and out stepped Jimmy Ruiz, the ranch's only hand, a wiry man with a laugh like a coyote's yip. Jimmy was loyal to a fault, sticking with Colt through lean years when most hands jumped ship. "Mornin', boss," Jimmy called, tossing a bale of hay from the truck bed. "Cattle's looking skinny. We got enough feed for the week?" "Barely," Colt grunted, tossing him a water bottle. "Stretch it best you can." Jimmy squinted at the horizon, wiping sweat from his brow. "Heard the bank circling again. Old man Carver at the feed store was talking." "Let him talk." Colt's voice was sharp, pride flaring like a struck match. He didn't need pity. Not from Carver, not from Jimmy, not from anyone. A cowboy earned his way, no matter how deep the hole. Jimmy hesitated, then shrugged. "You riding this weekend? That person Marfa could buy a month's feed." "If my shoulder holds," Colt said, though they both knew he'd ride regardless. The rodeo was his last shot at real money, even if every buck threatened to break him for good. As Jimmy headed to the barn, Colt climbed into his Chevy, the engine coughing like an old smoker. The day's work waited, fences to mend, cattle to check. But first, he had a shift in town. Presidio's streets were a mix of sun-bleached adobe and flickering neon, a border town where dreams came to die or smuggle themselves across the Rio Grande. Colt's Uber app pinged as he hit the main drag, the scent of diesel and tacos filling the cab. His first fare was a kid, barely 20, reeking of tequila and heartbreak, mumbling about a girl who'd left him. Colt listened, nodded, dropped him at a motel with a grunt of advice. "Love's a bull, ride it till it throws you." The night blurred into a parade of faces, truckers, barflies, tourists chasing Instagram shots of the desert. Colt's shoulder burned, but he kept driving, each fare $1 closer to saving the ranch. In the quiet stretches, his mind wandered to the bank's latest letter, tucked unopened in his glove box. 60 days. That's what they'd given him to pay the final loan, or the McGraw spread would be auctioned off like a cheap saddle. The thought twisted his gut, not just for the land, but for what it meant. His name, his blood, his father's ghost, all gone. He pulled into the Longhorn Bar's lot, a neon oasis where rodeo boys and locals drowned their sorrows. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and Merle Haggard's twang. Colt grabbed a stool, nursing a lone star as the bartender, Rosa, slid him a plate of nachos. "On the house," she said, her eyes soft with pity Colt hated seeing. "You look like you're carrying the world, mijo." "Just the ranch," he muttered, forcing a grin. Rosa had known him since he was a kid, sneaking beers with his dad's blessing. She was family, or as close as he got these days. Across the bar, a voice cut through the noise. "Well, if it ain't Colt McGraw, still playing cowboy." Trey Ballard, a rodeo rival with a smirk sharp as a spur, leaned against a pool table. Trey was all flash. New boots, new truck, new sponsors, everything Colt wasn't. They'd been friends once till Trey's ego and Colt's pride turned them sour. "Least I ride honest," Colt shot back, eyes narrowing. Trey's last win came on a rigged draw, or so the circuit whispered. Trey laughed, loud and mean. "Honest don't pay the bank, McGraw. Heard they're measuring your ranch for a sale sign." The bar went quiet, eyes on Colt. His fist clenched, but he swallowed the fire in his throat. "Worry about your own ride, Ballard. I'll handle mine." Trey sauntered closer, voice low. "Keep riding with that busted wing. You'll be begging for scraps. Or maybe you already are." Colt stood, chair scraping, but Rosa's hand on his arm stopped him. "He ain't worth it," she whispered. Trey smirked and turned away, leaving Colt's blood boiling. He tossed a crumpled 10 on the bar and stalked out, the night air cool against his flushed skin. Back in his truck, Colt drove aimlessly, the town's lights smearing like wet paint. Trey's words stung because they were half true. Pride kept Colt from begging, but desperation was a wolf at his door. He pulled over at a lookout, the ranch visible in the distance, a dark silhouette against the stars. It was more than dirt and cattle. It was his father's laugh, his mother's songs, the only home he'd ever known. Losing it would be losing himself. He reached for the glove box, fingers brushing the bank's letter, but he didn't open it. Instead, he pulled out a photo, creased and faded. Him and his dad, 10 years old, branding calves under a wide sky. "I ain't done yet," he said, voice rough, as if his father could hear. A new Uber ping lit his phone, a fare from the edge of town. Colt hesitated, the ranch calling him home, but the app's promise of cash won out. He shifted into gear, dust swirling in his wake, unaware that this ride would change everything. As he drove toward the pickup, the desert stretched vast and unforgiving, a reminder that the land didn't care if he won or lost, just that he kept fighting. The road ahead was dark, the neon fading behind him. Colt adjusted his Stetson, the weight of the ranch settling deeper in his bones. Then, from the glove box, a corner of the bank's letter slipped free, fluttering to the floorboard like a taunt. Final notice, it read, bold and unyielding, 60 days. Colt's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening on the wheel. He didn't pick it up, didn't need to. The words were burned into him, a spur digging at his resolve. Whatever it took, bulls, fairs, or sheer damn stubbornness, he'd keep the land. Because a cowboy didn't just live on it, he was it. The last ride's price. The Marfa Rodeo Arena smelled of sweat, dust, and desperation. Colt McGraw tightened his glove, the leather creaking against his calloused palm, as he stared down the chute at Widowmaker, a 2,000-pound bull with eyes like black fire. His shoulder screamed, pins grinding from last year's wreck. But the $10,000 purse tonight could buy him another month, maybe 2, before the bank swallowed his family's ranch whole. The crowd's roar faded to a dull hum, drowned by the memory of his father's voice. Hold the land, Colt. It's who we are. At 32, Colt was a cowboy to his bones, and losing the McGraw spread would be like losing his own blood. A cowboy don't beg, he muttered, spitting into the dirt. He earns. Presidio's lights flickered in the distance, a border town of cracked asphalt and broken dreams, where Colt's life was a grind of ranch work, bull rides, and late-night Uber shifts. The ranch, 200 acres of mesquite and memory, was all he had left of his parents, Amos, felled by a heart attack in the barn, and his mother, taken by cancer when he was a boy. 5 years ago, Colt had sold off half the herd to cover a loan, a betrayal of his father's trust that still burned. Now, the bank's final notice sat heavy in his glove box, 60 days ticking down like a noose tightening. The land wasn't just dirt. It was his father's laugh, his mother's hymns, the promise he'd made at Amos's grave to keep the McGraw name alive. Gee! He climbed onto Widowmaker, the bull snorting and slamming the chute. The bell rang, and the gate flew open. 8 seconds. That's all he needed. The world blurred, hooves thundering, crowd screaming, pain lancing through his shoulder. Colt gripped the rope, body twisting with the bull's fury. At 6 seconds, Widowmaker spun hard, and Colt's hand slipped. He hit the dirt, breath punched out, as the bull's hooves grazed his ribs. The buzzer sounded. No score, no purse, just dust in his mouth and the crowd's pitying murmur. Colt staggered to his feet, waving off the medics. Trey Ballard, his slick-talking rival, leaned against the fence, smirking under a pristine Stetson. "Tough break, McGraw," Trey drawled, voice dripping venom. "Maybe sell that ranch before it's taken. Buy yourself a nice trailer." Colt's fist clenched, but he turned away, pride swallowing the urge to swing. "Keep talking, Ballard. I'll be back." Trey's laugh followed him out of the arena, sharp as a spur. Back at his truck, Colt slammed the door, the glove box rattling. He pulled out the bank's letter, its bold print glaring. $42,000 due by June 15th, or the ranch was gone. He crumpled it, cursing under his breath. The rodeo was his best shot, but Widowmaker had just kicked his hopes to hell. His phone buzzed. An Uber fare, another grind to scrape pennies, but he ignored it, staring at the desert stretching beyond the arena. The land was his identity, the only thing tethering him to the man he wanted to be. Losing it would make him nothing, just another drifter in a town that chewed up dreamers. He drove to the ranch, the Chevy's headlights cutting through the dark. The house loomed, sagging under years of neglect, its porch groaning as Colt stepped inside. Jimmy Ruiz, his loyal hand, sat at the kitchen table, nursing a beer. "Heard about the ride," Jimmy said, eyes soft with concern. "You all right?" "Fine," Colt snapped, grabbing a Lone Star from the fridge. He didn't want sympathy, didn't want anyone seeing the cracks in his armor. Jimmy leaned forward, voice low. "My cousin in Odessa, he's got work, hauling freight, good money. I could make a call." "A cowboy don't beg," Colt cut him off, the words a reflex. "I'll handle it." Jimmy sighed, shaking his head. "You're stubborn as a mule, boss. Ain't no shame in a hand up." Colt's jaw tightened. Jimmy meant well, but accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like spitting on his father's grave. He'd earned the money, even if it broke him. "Go home, Jimmy. We got fences to mend tomorrow." Alone, Colt sank into a chair, the house creaking around him. He pulled a photo from his wallet, him and Amos, branding calves under a wide sky, his father's grin bright as the sun. "I swore I'd keep it," he whispered, the words half prayer, half apology. The memory hit hard, Amos teaching him to ride, saying the land was their blood, their fight. Colt had been too young to understand then, but now it was all he had left. His phone buzzed again, another Uber ping. He ignored it, but the thought of cash gnawed at him. The rodeo was a bust and ranch work barely covered feed. He needed a win, something big. A flyer on the table caught his eye, a high-stakes bull riding invitational in El Paso next weekend, $25,000 purse. The entry fee was steep and his shoulder was a ticking bomb, but it could be his shot. Risky as hell, but so was doing nothing. He stepped outside, the desert air cool against his skin. The ranch stretched dark and quiet, cattle lowing in the distance. Colt walked to the barn where his father's old saddle hung, leather worn smooth by years of use. He ran a hand over it, the scent of hay and history grounding him. "You held it through worse," he said to the empty air. "I ain't letting go." Back in the truck, Colt fired up the Uber app, resigned to another night of fares. The border town's neon glowed as he cruised the main drag, picking up a chatty tourist couple who raved about Marfa's art scene. He nodded, half listening, his mind on the El Paso rodeo. Another fare, a quiet trucker, tipped him a crumpled $5. The night dragged, each mile a reminder of how far he was from $42,000. He stopped at a gas station, the fluorescent lights harsh against the desert dark. As he filled the tank, a man approached. Hank Carver, the feed store owner, his face lined like old leather. "Colt," Hank said, voice cautious. "Heard about the bank. I could float you some credit. Tide you over." "Whoa." Colt's gut twisted, pride flaring. "Appreciate it, Hank, but I'm good." The lie tasted bitter, but he'd rather starve than lean on charity. Hank frowned, adjusting his cap. "Pride's a heavy load, son. Your daddy learned that the hard way." Colt turned away, climbing into the truck. Hank's words stung, dragging up memories of Amos refusing help during a drought, working himself to death. Colt wasn't his father, but the stubborn streak ran deep. He'd earn the money, no matter the cost. The Uber app pinged again, a fare from a rough part of town, near the old rail yard where smugglers and drifters hung out. Colt hesitated. The area was trouble, but the payout was double. Cash he couldn't ignore. He accepted, steering the Chevy toward the edge of Presidio, where the neon faded and the desert took over. The streets grew narrow, lined with boarded-up shops and flickering streetlights. His shoulder ached, a dull warning, but he pushed it down, focusing on the road. As he neared the pickup spot, a figure stood under a busted street lamp, shadowed and still. Colt slowed, squinting through the windshield. The figure didn't move, just watched, a duffel bag slung over their shoulder. Something about it set his nerves on edge. Not a drunk, not a tourist, but someone who didn't belong. His phone buzzed with a text from the fare. "Hurry, they're close." Colt's hand tightened on the wheel, his pulse kicking up. "What the hell kind of ride is this?" he muttered, glancing at the shadowed figure. The desert night pressed in, heavy with secrets, and Colt McGraw, driven by a need to save his ranch, had no idea he was about to step off the edge of his world. Neon shadows. The neon lights of Presidio flickered like dying stars, casting jagged shadows across the cracked asphalt. Colt McGraw's '98 Chevy rumbled through the border town's back streets, the engine's low hum mingling with the distant wail of a coyote. It was past midnight and his shoulder throbbed, a dull reminder of the bull that had nearly broken him. But the Uber app's ping had promised a double fare from the rail yard, cash he couldn't turn down. The ranch's final loan loomed like a storm cloud, $42,000 due in 60 days, and every dollar was a step toward keeping his family's land. He adjusted his Stetson, eyes scanning the empty road, until a figure emerged under a busted street lamp, duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Colt slowed, unease prickling his neck. This wasn't a drunk or a tourist. This was trouble. He pulled up, the truck's headlights catching the woman's face. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair spilling from a loose braid, and eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. She yanked the passenger door open, tossing the duffel into the footwell with a heavy thud. "Just drive, Cowboy," she said, voice low and tight, sliding into the seat. Her name flashed on the app. Sarah. No last name. Colt's gut twisted. He didn't trust strangers, not in a town where secrets crossed the border faster than drugs. His focus was the ranch, his father's legacy, his mother's memory, the dirt he'd sworn to hold. Getting tangled in someone else's mess wasn't on the plan. "Where to?" he asked, voice gruff, keeping the truck idling. The air in the cab thickened, scented with dust and something sharp like fear. "Next town over, Marfa," Sarah said, her gaze flicking to the side mirror. Fast as you can." Colt's eyes narrowed. Marfa was a 40-minute haul, and her tone wasn't asking, it was ordering. He glanced at the duffel, its zipper half open, revealing a glint of metal. A gun? Cash? His mind raced, but the app's payout, $80, maybe more, flashed in his head. The ranch needed it. "Ain't a taxi," he said, shifting into gear. "You got trouble. I don't want it." Sarah's lips pressed thin, but she didn't answer, just gripped the bag tighter. Colt hit the gas, the Chevy lurching onto the road. The neon signs blurred. Lone Star Beer, Tacos El Rey, a pawn shop with iron bars. Presidio's streets were a maze of half-lit dreams, where smugglers and drifters moved like ghosts. Colt knew the type, and Sarah, with her nervous eyes and heavy bag, fit the mold too well. You running from something?" he asked, keeping his voice casual, though his hand rested near the knife tucked under the seat. His father, Amos, had taught him to read people, same as reading a bull's twitch. Sarah was spooked, and that made her dangerous. "Ain't your business," she snapped, then softened, like she'd caught herself. "Just get me to Marfa, all right? I'll tip big." Colt grunted, unconvinced. Her fear was real, though, etched in the way her fingers twitched, the way she kept checking the mirror. He'd seen that look before, on ranch hands who'd crossed the wrong cartel, on rodeo boys who'd bet too deep. Against his better judgment, curiosity stirred. "Big tip don't mean clean money," he said. "I got enough problems." Sarah's eyes met his, sharp and searching, like she was sizing him up. "Then why you driving a beat-up truck for pennies?" "Nah, man like you, cowboy hat, tough talk. You're chasing something too." The jab hit close, stirring the ache of the bank's deadline, the ranch slipping through his fingers. "Mind your own," he said, voice low, but her words lingered. She wasn't wrong, and that pissed him off. The road stretched dark, the desert swallowing the town's glow. Colt's headlights carved a path through the night, the hum of the engine a steady pulse. Then, a flicker in the rear view. A black SUV, no plates, creeping up fast. His pulse kicked up. "Friend of yours?" he asked, nodding at the mirror. Sarah twisted, her breath catching. "Number, keep driving. Don't stop." "Who's tailing you?" Colt's voice hardened, his distrust flaring. The SUV gained, its headlights blinding. He pressed the gas, the Chevy groaning as it hit 70. The ranch, his promise to his father, flashed in his mind. He didn't need this, didn't need her. But the glint in her bag, her fear, it hooked him, a spur digging into his curiosity. "They're after me," Sarah said, voice barely above a whisper. "People you don't want to meet. Just drive." "People like who?" Colt snapped, swerving to avoid a pothole. The SUV matched his move, closing the gap. His knife was close, but a blade wouldn't stop a car chase. "I ain't your damn chauffeur. Talk." Sarah hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice urgent. "I've got something they want, something big. You stop, we're both dead." The words landed like a hoof to the chest. Colt's mind spun. Drugs? Money? Whatever it was bad news. He should pull over, kick her out, let her deal with her own mess. But the SUV was too close, its engine roaring like a predator. And something in Sarah's eyes, not just fear but defiance, stirred a flicker of his cowboy code. You didn't leave someone to the wolves, not if you could help it. "Hold on," he growled, yanking the wheel. The Chevy veered onto a dirt road, tires kicking up dust, the suspension rattling like bones. The SUV followed, its lights cutting through the cloud. Colt knew these back roads, smuggler trails his father had shown him as a kid. He floored it, the truck bouncing over ruts, mesquite branches scraping the sides. Sarah braced against the dash, the duffel sliding to the floor. A corner of it flapped open, and Colt caught a glimpse. Not cash, not drugs, but a stack of papers, photos, and a flash drive. What the hell's that?" he demanded, eyes flicking between the road and the bag. "Proof," Sarah said, voice shaking but firm. Proof they're stealing everything. Land, lives. You don't want to know more. Too late for that, Colt muttered, swerving to avoid a ditch. The SUV was gaining, its driver reckless, clipping a cactus. Colt's shoulder burned, but adrenaline drowned it. He wasn't just driving now. He was running, caught in a game he didn't understand. His distrust screamed to ditch her, but the papers, her words, gnawed at him. Land. That hit too close, too raw, with the bank's noose around his ranch. The road narrowed, curving toward an old bridge over a dry wash. Colt gunned it, the Chevy's tires screeching as he hit the bridge's wooden planks. The SUV followed, too close, its bumper grazing his tailgate. Sarah cursed, digging in her bag, pulling out a pistol, a snub-nosed .38 gleaming in the dashboard light. You know how to use that? Oh, Colt asked, voice tight. Better than you, she shot back, rolling down the window. She leaned out, firing 2 shots at the SUV's tires. The cracks echoed, sharp and final, but the SUV didn't slow, its driver weaving like a drunk. Jesus, woman, Colt yelled, heart pounding. You trying to get us killed? They're trying, Sarah shouted, firing again. The SUV swerved, one tire blowing, but it kept coming, relentless. Colt's mind raced. Dump her at the next turn or keep going. His pride, his need to stay clean, battled the instinct to protect her. She wasn't just a fare anymore. She was a fuse, lit and burning. He spotted a fork ahead, one path leading to open desert, the other to a maze of arroyos. He chose the arroyos, jerking the wheel hard. The Chevy skidded, dust choking the air as they plunged into the narrow canyons. The SUV hesitated, then followed, its lights dimming in the haze. Colt's knuckles whitened, his breath ragged. Who are they? He demanded, voice raw. No more games. Sarah slumped back, gun trembling in her hand. Lawmen, she said, the word like a curse. Dirty ones. Sheriff's deputies working for someone bigger. They'll kill me to keep this quiet. Colt's blood ran cold. Dirty lawmen. In Presidio, that wasn't a stretch. Cartels bought badges like candy. But sheriffs? That was a different kind of rot, one that hit his hatred of crooked authority square. You're saying I'm dodging cops? He asked, incredulous. Not cops, Sarah said, eyes blazing. Monsters with badges. Before he could press, a new sound cut through. A second engine, roaring from a side canyon. Headlights flashed, blinding, as a pickup truck surged out, slamming into the Chevy's rear. The impact threw Colt forward, his chest hitting the wheel, Sarah's gun skittering to the floor. The Chevy fishtailed, tires screaming, as the pickup rammed again, metal crunching. Colt fought the wheel, heart in his throat, as the arroyo walls closed in. Get down! He roared, shoving Sarah's head low. The SUV was back, boxing them in, and the pickup's driver leaned out, a man in a sheriff's hat, face shadowed, aiming a shotgun. Colt's world shrank to survival, the ranch fading, his code cracking under the weight of a truth he couldn't ignore. He was in too deep, and there was no turning back. Code in the crossfire. The desert night was a black shroud, broken only by the flicker of a neon sign buzzing Motel El Sol in sickly green. Colt McGraw's Chevy idled in the gravel lot, its engine ticking like a cooling gun. Inside the cab, Sarah clutched her duffel bag, her breath shallow, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the motel's sagging porch. The chase through the arroyos had left them shaken, tailed by a sheriff's pickup and a black SUV, both driven by men with badges and murder in their eyes. Colt's shoulder burned, his ribs bruised from the crash, but the real pain was in his head. He'd stepped into a world he didn't understand, and it was threatening to swallow him whole. The ranch, his father's legacy, was 60 days from foreclosure, and here he was, hiding with a stranger who'd turned his life into a bullet-dodging mess. Stay low, Colt muttered, cutting the engine. The motel was a dive, its adobe walls stained with years of dust and despair, the kind of place where questions cost more than rooms. Presidio's backroads had bought them time, but the lawmen, Dirty sheriffs, Sarah had called them, weren't far behind. Colt's instinct was to ditch her, drive straight to the bank with her reward money. That duffel, stuffed with papers and a flash drive, was worth something, maybe enough to save the McGraw spread. But her words, monsters with badges, had struck a nerve. "I don't truck with liars," he'd told her, voice low as they'd peeled out of the canyon. "But I hate a badge that's turned bad." Crooked law was a poison he couldn't stomach, not after seeing his father hounded by corrupt officials during a land dispute years ago. "Ooh," Sarah nodded, her dark braid slipping over one shoulder. "Room 6. I've got a key. Move fast." Her voice was sharp like a blade honed by necessity, but her hands trembled as she zipped the bag. She was no damsel, too tough for that, but desperation clung to her like dust. Colt scanned the lot. A rusted Camaro, a dumpster overflowing with beer cans. No other souls. "You sure this place is safe?" he asked, his hand resting on the knife under his seat. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with $42,000 due and his ranch on the line. "Nowhere's safe," Sarah said, meeting his gaze. "But it's what we've got." He grunted, stepping out into the cool night air, the scent of creosote and diesel heavy. Sarah followed, duffel slung low, her pistol tucked in her waistband. The motel's door creaked as they slipped into room 6, a dim cave of peeling wallpaper and cigarette burns. Colt locked the bolt, his cowboy boots scuffing the stained carpet. "Talk," he said, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "What's in that bag? And why's half the county trying to kill you?" "Moral..." Sarah set the duffel on the bed, her movements deliberate, like she was weighing every word. "You don't want to know more than you need," she said, but her eyes flickered with something. Guilt, maybe, or grief. "It's evidence. Land deals, bribes, names. People losing everything to a scheme they can't fight." "Land?" Colt's voice sharpened, the word hitting too close. His ranch, his blood, was slipping away because of a bank. But a scheme? That sounded like the kind of rot his father had raged against. "What kind of scheme?" Sarah hesitated, then pulled a photo from the bag, a grainy shot of a man in a sheriff's hat shaking hands with a suit in a fancy office. "They're grabbing land across West Texas," she said. "Ranches, farms, even tribal plots. Foreclosures pushed through, deeds faked. The law's in on it. Sheriffs, judges, all bought." Colt's jaw tightened, his hatred of crooked authority flaring. His father had lost a grazing lease to a rigged county deal, the stress helping kill him. "And you're what, the hero fixin' it?" he asked, skepticism thick. "Or just a thief who stole the wrong thing?" Sarah's eyes flashed, but she didn't snap back. "I was a clerk," she said, voice low. "County records office. Saw too much, took what I could. Now they want me dead." Her fingers brushed the photo, lingering on a corner. "My brother lost his place to them. I'm all he's got left." The admission softened her edges, and Colt felt a pang. Her fight wasn't so different from his, but helping her meant risking the ranch, his promise to his father. Turning her in could net a reward, maybe enough to pay the bank. "There's a price on you," he said, testing her. "Enough to clear my debts. Why shouldn't I call the sheriff right now?" Sarah's hand twitched toward her gun, but she stopped, meeting his stare. "Because you're not that guy," she said. "You hate them as much as I do. And if you turn me in, they'll burn you too. You think your ranch ain't on their list?" The words landed like a hoof to the gut. Colt's mind churned, distrust warring with the instinct to believe her. She was sharp, guarded, but her story rang true, too close to his own. He paced, boots thudding, the moral dilemma clawing at him. Save the ranch, or help a stranger who might drag him under. His father's voice echoed, "Do what's right, even when it hurts." But right was a blurry line out here. A knock at the door froze them both. Colt's hand went to his knife, Sarah to her pistol. "Who is it?" he called, voice low. "Jimmy," came the reply, muffled but familiar. Jimmy Ruiz, his ranch hand, the only man Colt trusted with the cattle. Relief flickered, but suspicion followed. Jimmy shouldn't be here. Colt cracked the door, keeping the chain on. Jimmy stood in the neon glow, hat low, eyes darting. "Boss, you in trouble?" "Or," he asked, voice tense. "Saw your truck. Folks at the Longhorn are talking. Sheriff's looking for a woman with a bag." Colt's gut twisted. "How'd you find me?" he asked, keeping Sarah out of sight. "Heard you took a fare to the rail yard," Jimmy said. "Figured you'd hole up here. Let me help, Colt. Whatever's going on." Sarah hissed softly, shaking her head, her instincts screaming trap. Colt hesitated, his trust in Jimmy battling the stakes. "Go home, Jimmy," he said, voice hard. "I got this." Jimmy frowned, lingering. "You sure? Sheriff's offering cash for tips. Big cash." The words hit like a betrayal. Colt slammed the door, locking it, his heart pounding. "He sold us out," Sarah whispered, gun raised. "We gotta move, now." D. Colt's mind reeled. Jimmy, loyal Jimmy, tempted by a reward. It stung, but he couldn't dwell. "Back roads," he said, grabbing the duffel. "I know a trail to Marfa." His cowboy skills, tracking, evasion, kicked in, honed by years of navigating the desert with his father. He'd outrun coyotes and storms. He could outrun this. They slipped out the back, the motel's alley reeking of garbage and stale beer. Colt led, reading Sarah's signals, her quick glances, her tense silence, like he'd read a bull's twitch. The Chevy was parked a block away, hidden behind a shuttered taqueria. They moved fast, shadows in the neon haze, but a low rumble stopped them cold. An engine, idling nearby. Colt crouched behind a dumpster, pulling Sarah down. A sheriff's cruiser crept past, its spotlight sweeping the lot. "Close," Sarah breathed, her hand brushing his, a fleeting moment of connection. Colt nodded, their uneasy alliance hardening. She wasn't just a fare anymore, she was a partner, whether he liked it or not. They reached the truck, climbing in as the cruiser's lights faded. Colt took a smuggler's trail, the Chevy bouncing over ruts, mesquite clawing the sides. The desert was his domain, but the lawmen knew it too. Sarah checked the mirrors, her gun on her lap. "You're good at this," she said, a grudging respect in her voice. "Why a cowboy?" "Born to it," Colt said, eyes on the trail. "My dad taught me the land, said it's our fight." He paused, then added, "What's your fight?" Sarah's jaw tightened, but she answered, "My brother's land was all he had. They took it, left him broke. I couldn't just watch." Her voice cracked, revealing a wound as raw as Colt's. He didn't push, but the trust between them grew, fragile but real. The trail opened to a dry wash, and Colt slowed, spotting tire tracks, fresh, too wide for a car. "They're ahead," he said, cursing. A failed evasion, another setback. He veered west, toward an old mine, but headlights flared behind them, the SUV from the Arroyos closing fast. Sarah gripped her gun, but Colt shook his head. "Save your bullets, we're outrunning them." "Moo." He floored it, the Chevy roaring, but the SUV was relentless, its driver weaving through the wash. Colt's skills kept them ahead, dodging boulders, using the terrain, but the gap shrank. Sarah rifled through the duffel, pulling a map marked with red X's. "This is it," she said, voice urgent. "Their targets. Ranches, Colt. Yours is here." He glanced at the map, his blood icing. A red X sat over the McGraw spread, clear as a brand. The scheme wasn't just Sarah's fight, it was his. Before he could speak, a shotgun blast shattered the rear windshield, glass spraying like shrapnel. Colt swerved, Sarah ducking, as the SUV rammed their tailgate. The mine loomed ahead, a black maw in the desert, and Colt faced a choice: drive into its tunnels, a gamble with no exit, or stand and fight. The map burned in his mind, his ranch marked for theft, and the sheriff's hat in the SUV's window sealed it. He wasn't running anymore. Truth's bitter edge. The abandoned mine swallowed Colt McGraw's Chevy like a beast's maw, its tunnel walls jagged and black under the truck's flickering headlights. Dust choked the air, the scent of damp earth and old dynamite thick in the cab. Colt's hands gripped the wheel, his shoulders screaming from the chase that had driven them here. A sheriff's SUV ramming their tailgate, a shotgun blast shattering the rear windshield. Beside him, Sarah clutched her duffel bag, her pistol gleaming in the dashboard light, her face taut with defiance and fear. The map she'd shown him burned in Colt's mind. A red X marking his family's ranch, proof it was targeted by the same land-grabbing scheme she was running from. 60 days from foreclosure, the McGraw spread was all he had. His father's legacy, his mother's memory, his identity as a cowboy. Helping Sarah was a risk that could cost him everything, but turning back wasn't an option anymore. "Keep going," Sarah said, voice low but steady, her eyes scanning the tunnel's shadows. "There's an old shaft up ahead. We can lose him." Colt nodded, his jaw tight. The mine was a maze, a relic of Presidio's boom days, and he knew it from boyhood explorations with his father Amos. Those memories, Amos's laugh, his lessons about the land, felt like ghosts now, urging him forward. The SUV's headlights flared behind them, the sheriff's pursuit relentless. Colt's cowboy skills, honed tracking cattle and dodging storms, were all that kept them ahead. But the tunnel narrowed, the walls scraping the Chevy's sides. "This better work," he muttered, "or we're sitting ducks." Sarah's hand brushed his arm, a fleeting touch that grounded him. "It will," she said, her voice softer, revealing a trust that hadn't been there an hour ago. Their uneasy alliance, forged in the Arroyo chase and the motel hideout, was hardening into something real. She wasn't just a fugitive clerk with a flash drive. She was a fighter, like him, carrying a wound as raw as his own. The tunnel split, and Colt veered left, guided by memory. The SUV followed, its engine roaring like a predator. A side shaft loomed barely wide enough for the truck. "Hold on," Colt said, yanking the wheel. The Chevy scraped through, metal screeching as the SUV skidded, too wide to follow. Its headlights dimmed, blocked by the tight passage, buying them a moment. Colt killed the engine, plunging them into darkness, the only sound their ragged breaths. "Now what?" he whispered, his knife drawn, ready for a fight. The mine's chill seeped into his bones, the border town's neon world a lifetime away. Sarah unzipped the duffel, pulling out the map, a flashlight, and a stack of documents. "We checked the evidence," she said, clicking the light on. "If we're going to stop them, you need to know everything." Colt's gut churned. Stopping a land-grabbing scheme, sheriffs, judges, suit-stealing ranches, was bigger than saving his own land. But the red X on the map, marking the McGraw spread, made it personal. "Show me," he said, leaning closer, the flashlight's beam casting stark shadows. Sarah spread the documents, deeds, emails, photos. "It's a network," she said, voice urgent. "They force foreclosures, fake auctions, push people out. My brother's farm was first, stripped clean, left him broke. Then I found this." She tapped a photo of a man in a sheriff's hat, the same one from the motel, shaking hands with a slick-haired suit. "Sheriff Delgado. He's their muscle. The suit's a land developer, buying up West Texas for pennies." Colt's eyes locked on a deed, his ranch's name scrawled in red ink. His heart stopped, then pounded. "They ain't just after you," he said, voice raw with realization. "They're after all of us." The truth hit like a bull's hoof. His fight to save the ranch wasn't just against the bank. It was against a machine, one that chewed up lives like his father's, his mother's, his own. The victory was bittersweet, tying his fate to Sarah's, making his goal of saving the ranch feel within reach but impossibly heavy. Sarah nodded, her eyes meeting his, a shared fire igniting. "That's why I took it," she said, holding up the flash drive. "Every deal, every bribe, enough to burn them down, if we can get it out." Colt's mind raced, the moral dilemma from the motel sharpening. Helping her meant diving deeper into danger, risking the ranch, his life. Turning her in could still net a reward, clear his debt. But the deed, the X, the memory of his father's voice, do what's right, tipped the scale. "How'd you get this?" he asked, needing to trust her fully. Sarah's jaw tightened, her guard dropping just enough. "Worked records for 5 years, she said. Saw the patterns, deeds changing overnight, ranchers bullied out. My brother fought, lost everything. I started copying files, late nights till Delgado caught on. Been running since." Her voice cracked, revealing a wound. Her brother, broken, was her why, just as the ranch was Colt's. The vulnerability cemented their bond, a moment of shared risk in the mind's dark. Colt touched her shoulder, brief but steady. "We'll get it out," he said, the words a vow, though his gut screamed the cost would be steep. A low rumble broke the silence. The SUV, circling back, joined by another engine. Colt's pulse spiked. "They're closing in," he said, grabbing the documents. "We move now." Sarah stuffed the evidence back, her flashlight sweeping the shaft. Colt led, using his tracking skills to navigate the mine's twists, his boots crunching on gravel. The air grew heavy, the tunnel sloping down. They reached a wider chamber, old timbers sagging overhead, when a voice echoed, "Colt! You in here?" Colt froze, recognizing the twang. Jimmy Ruiz, his ranch hand, the man he'd trusted with his cattle, his home. But Jimmy's words at the motel, sheriff's offering cash, still stung. Sarah gripped her gun, shaking her head, but Colt signaled for quiet, stepping toward the voice. "Jimmy?" he called, knife ready, emerging into the chamber's dim light. Jimmy stood alone, hat low, hands raised, but his eyes darted nervously. "Boss, thank God," Jimmy said, voice shaky. "I followed you from the motel. Sheriff's got the roads blocked. I came to warn you." Colt's relief curdled into suspicion. "How'd you know we were here?" he asked, voice low, his cowboy instincts reading Jimmy's twitch like a spooked horse. Jimmy hesitated, too long. "Saw your truck tracks," he said, but his hand slipped toward his belt. Before Colt could react, a shotgun racked behind them, and Sheriff Delgado stepped from the shadows, flanked by a deputy with a scar across his cheek. Jimmy's face fell, guilt plain as day. "Jimmy, you son of a—" Colt's words choked off as Delgado raised the shotgun, its barrel glinting. "Drop the knife, McGraw," Delgado said, voice smooth as oil. "Your boy here made a smart call. Reward's big for the girl and her bag." The betrayal cut deeper than any bull's horn. Jimmy, loyal Jimmy, had sold him out for cash, just as Sarah had feared. Colt's fist clenched, but he dropped the knife, knowing a fight now was suicide. Sarah stood rigid, gun hidden behind her back, her eyes locked on Colt's, silently urging him to act. "You're the rot," Colt spat at Delgado, his hatred of crooked badges boiling over. "Stealing land, hiding behind that star." Delgado smirked, stepping closer. "Land's just business, cowboy. You're in over your head." Sarah moved fast, firing a wild shot that grazed the deputy's arm. The chamber erupted. Delgado's shotgun roared, splintering a timber, as Colt dove, tackling Sarah behind a crate. Bullets pinged off stone, the air thick with dust and cordite. Colt's ribs flared, bruised from the earlier crash, but he dragged Sarah toward a side tunnel, her duffel slung over his shoulder. Jimmy shouted, "I didn't mean it, Colt." But the words were hollow, lost in the chaos. They scrambled through the tunnel, Delgado's curses echoing. Colt's injury slowed him, blood seeping from a gash on his arm where a bullet had grazed. The mine shook, timbers groaning, as a stray shot hit a weak beam. "Keep moving," Colt grunted, his tracking skills guiding them toward an old ventilation shaft his father had shown him. The cost of the truth was clear: a friend's betrayal, a wound, a target on their backs. But the evidence, the X on his ranch, made it worth it, for now. They reached the shaft, its rusted ladder leading to the surface. Sarah climbed first, Colt following, pain shooting through his arm. As they emerged into the desert night, the mine's mouth glowed with the sheriff's headlights, closing fast. Sarah's flashlight caught a glint in the duffel, a photo missed before, showing Delgado with a man Colt knew. Carver, the feed store owner who'd offered him credit. Carver, who'd pushed his father into a bad deal years ago, speeding Amos's death. Oh. The twist hit like a gut punch. The scheme wasn't just random. It was personal, tied to Colt's past, his family's ruin. "We're not just running now," he said, voice hard, as the sheriff's SUV roared closer. "We're fighting." Swinging in the storm. The desert night roared with chaos, a symphony of screeching tires and gunfire that drowned out the stars. Colt McGraw's '98 Chevy fishtailed across the hardpan, its engine screaming as he pushed it past its limits. The sheriff's SUV loomed in the rear view, its headlights blinding, a black beast driven by Delgado, the corrupt lawman whose land-grabbing scheme had marked Colt's ranch for theft. Beside Colt, Sarah gripped her pistol, her duffel bag of evidence. Deeds, photos, a flash drive exposing the scheme, wedged between her feet. The mine escape had bought them minutes, but Delgado's pursuit was relentless, his shotgun blasts echoing like thunder. Colt's arm bled from a bullet graze, his ribs bruised, but the real wound was deeper. Jimmy's betrayal, his loyal ranch hand turned informant for a reward. The ranch, 60 days from foreclosure, was Colt's blood, his father's legacy, and fighting for it now could cost him everything. "If I'm going down," he growled, swerving to avoid a mesquite, "I'm going down swinging." Yee. The Chevy's tires kicked up dust, the border town's neon long gone, replaced by the Chihuahuan Desert's vast, unforgiving sprawl. Presidio's back roads were Colt's domain, learned from his father, Amos, who'd navigated these trails to outrun rustlers. But the SUV was faster, its driver reckless, clipping boulders and cacti to close the gap. Sarah fired out the shattered rear windshield, her .38's cracks sharp in the night, but the SUV weaved, untouched. "They're too close," she shouted, her braid whipping as she reloaded. "Keep shooting," Colt said, voice taut, his cowboy instincts razor sharp. The ranch, the red X on Sarah's map, drove him forward, but the cost was mounting. Jimmy's treachery, the blood seeping through his sleeve, the bank's deadline ticking like a bomb. He spotted a dry wash ahead, its bank steep enough to slow the SUV. He yanked the wheel, the Chevy plunging down, tires screaming, metal groaning as it bottomed out. The SUV followed, but its weight bogged it down, buying seconds. Then a sickening sputter. The engine coughed, starved of fuel or broken by the chase. The Chevy lurched, slowing as steam hissed from the hood. "No, no, no," Colt cursed, pounding the dash. The truck rolled to a stop, stranded in the wash, a sitting duck. The SUV's headlights flared, Delgado's voice booming through a megaphone. "End of the line, McGraw. Drop the bag or we bury you both." Sarah's eyes met Colt's, fear and fire in equal measure. "We run," she said, grabbing the duffel. "There's a ridge half a mile west. Cover there." Colt's mind raced. Run, and they'd be hunted. Stay, and they'd be dead. His knife was no match for shotguns, and Sarah's ammo was low. But the ranch, his promise to his father, burned brighter than fear. "Ain't running," he said, kicking the door open. "Not yet." He grabbed a flare from the glove box, his only weapon, and lit it, the red glow hissing like a snake. He tossed it toward the SUV, hoping to blind Delgado's aim. "Go!" he shouted, shoving Sarah toward the bank. They scrambled up, dirt sliding under their boots, as a shotgun blast splintered a rock nearby. Colt's arm throbbed, blood soaking his shirt, a physical price for this fight. But the emotional toll was heavier. Jimmy's face, guilt-ridden in the mine, haunted him. His one ally, gone for a payout. The loss cut deep, a crack in his cowboy code. They reached the ridge, crouching behind a boulder. The SUV circled the wrecked Chevy, Delgado's men fanning out, flashlights slicing the dark. Sarah checked her gun, 3 rounds left. "We can't outshoot 'em," she said, voice low. "We need a plan." Colt's eyes scanned the horizon, landing on a faint glow. The McGraw ranch, 2 miles off, its barn a speck under the stars. His father's old horse, Rusty, a retired quarter horse, was stabled there. A desperate idea sparked. "I know a way," he said, voice grim. "But it's gonna hurt." Sarah frowned, then nodded, trusting his lead. They slipped along the ridge, Colt's tracking skills guiding them through scrub and shadow, his boots silent on the hardpan. The ranch was a gamble, but it was home, his ground. Delgado's men were close, their shouts carrying, and a second vehicle, a pickup, joined the hunt, its headlights sweeping the wash. Halfway to the ranch, a figure stepped from the dark, blocking their path. Trey Ballard, Colt's rodeo rival, his new truck parked nearby. Trey's smirk was gone, replaced by a cold glint. "Didn't expect you here, McGraw," he said, hand on a revolver. "Sheriff's paying good for that bag." Colt's blood boiled, another betrayal slicing through him. Trey, the flash-talking cowboy he'd once called a friend, had turned snake. "You're one of 'em?" Colt spat, fists clenched. "Selling out for a badge of scraps?" Trey shrugged, unashamed. "A man's gotta eat. Hand her over, Colt. Save your ranch." The offer was a moral compromise, a test of Colt's code. Turn Sarah in, and Trey might pull strings, maybe clear the bank debt. But the ranch wasn't just land. It was his father's fight, his mother's memory, everything Sarah's evidence stood to protect. "Go to hell," Colt said, voice low, and lunged, tackling Trey before he could draw. They hit the ground, fists flying, Colt's injured arm slowing him. Trey landed a blow to his ribs, pain exploding. But Colt's rage was stronger. He slammed Trey's head into the dirt, knocking him out, then grabbed the revolver. Sarah stood guard, her gun trained on the dark. "Move!" she hissed, as Delgado's flashlights closed in. They ran, Colt's breath ragged, his body pushed to its breaking point. The ranch loomed, its fence a dark line against the sky. They vaulted it, dodging cattle, and reached the barn, its wood weathered but solid. Rusty snorted inside, sensing trouble. Colt threw open the stall, saddling the old horse with shaking hands, the scent of hay and leather grounding him. "You ever ride?" "Me," he asked Sarah, cinching the girth. "Enough," she said, slinging the duffel over her shoulder. Her eyes held his, a moment of vulnerability. "You don't have to do this, Colt. This is my fight." "It's ours," he said, the words a sacrifice, tying his fate to hers. The ranch was at risk. Delgado could torch it if they were caught, but the truth in her bag was bigger than one spread. His father's voice echoed, "Right's worth dying for." Colt was at his breaking point, doubt gnawing. Could he save the ranch, or was he throwing it away? But Sarah's trust, her shared wound, steeled him. They mounted Rusty, Sarah behind, her arms tight around his waist. Colt spurred the horse, and Rusty surged, hooves pounding, a galloper even in retirement. The desert blurred, mesquite whipping past, as Delgado's SUV and the pickup roared onto the ranch, headlights slicing the night. Gunfire cracked, bullets buzzing like hornets, one grazing Colt's thigh, blood soaking his jeans. He gritted his teeth, the physical price mounting, but kept Rusty on course, aiming for a canyon beyond the ranch, a smuggler's hideout his father had shown him. The chase was relentless, tires screeching, engines roaring. Rusty's breath heaved, foam flecking his muzzle, but the old horse held strong. Colt leaned low, Sarah's grip steady, their shared risk a lifeline. A moral compromise loomed. Colt spotted a cartel trail, marked by a skull on a post, a path Delgado might hesitate to follow. It meant dealing with a lesser evil, risking cartel wrath, but it was their only shot. "Hold tight," he said, veering toward the trail. Sarah tensed. "You sure?" she asked, sensing the danger. "Ain't sure of nothing," Colt admitted, his code bending under the weight of survival. The cartel was a devil, but Delgado was worse. They hit the trail, Rusty galloping through a narrow pass, the SUV slowing at the skull, its driver wary. The pickup, though, kept coming, its driver, a deputy, firing wildly. Colt's thigh burned, his vision blurring, but he pushed Rusty harder, the canyon's walls closing in. A final shot rang out and Rusty stumbled, a bullet hitting his flank. The horse screamed, collapsing, throwing Colt and Sarah into the dirt. Colt's heart broke. Rusty, his father's last gift, was down, a personal loss that cut deeper than his wounds. "I'm sorry, old boy," he whispered, crawling to Sarah. She was up, gun raised as the pickup stopped, the deputy advancing. Colt grabbed Trey's revolver, his hands slick with blood, and fired, hitting the deputy's leg. The man dropped, cursing, and Colt dragged Sarah into a crevice, the canyon's shadows hiding them. The SUV circled back, but the cartel trail's reputation held. Delgado hesitated, engines fading as they retreated, a temporary victory. Colt slumped, pain and loss crashing over him. Sarah tore her shirt, binding his thigh, her touch steady. "You saved us," she said, voice soft. But Colt's eyes were on Rusty, still in the dirt. The cost was too high, his horse, his trust in Jimmy, his ranch still at risk. The fight wasn't over. Delgado would come harder now, and the cartel trail was a debt they'd pay later. But the evidence, the truth, was safe, and Colt's resolve hardened. "We ain't done swinging," he said, voice raw as the desert night closed in, heavy with the promise of more blood. Home, hard won. The dawn broke over the McGraw ranch, painting the Chihuahuan desert in soft golds and pinks, a quiet contrast to the blood and chaos of the night before. Colt McGraw stood on the sagging porch of his family's ranch house, his boots scuffing the weathered boards, his arm bandaged and his thigh throbbing from a bullet graze. The air smelled of mesquite and fresh dew, a familiar balm after the hell he'd ridden through. Chases, betrayals, and a fight that had nearly cost him everything. The land-grabbing scheme, a web of corrupt sheriffs and developers, was exposed, its truth spilling out when Sarah's evidence hit the press. The bank's foreclosure notice, once a noose around the ranch, was lifted, replaced by a reward check for $50,000. Blood money for turning over Delgado's network. Colt's hand tightened on the porch rail, his Stetson low over eyes that saw the land differently now. "Turns out the code still matters," he muttered, voice rough, "even in the dark. Yo." Presidio's neon-lit streets, the rodeo arena's dust, the ranch's cracked earth, they were the same, yet foreign. Colt's journey had reshaped him, his stubborn pride tempered by sacrifice and loss. The ranch, 200 acres of his father's legacy, was safe, but the cost lingered. Rusty, his father's horse, dead in the canyon. Jimmy, his trusted hand, turned traitor for a sheriff's bribe. And Sarah, the woman who'd fought beside him, now wrestling with her own path. Colt wasn't the same cowboy who'd leaned against the fence a week ago, ignoring bank notices and driving Uber to scrape by. He'd faced his flaws, pride, isolation, and found a strength he hadn't known. But the return to familiarity brought a quieter conflict, rebuilding what was broken, inside and out. The ranch house creaked behind him, its peeling paint a mirror of Colt's own scars. Inside, the kitchen smelled of coffee and leather, the same as always. But the silence was heavier. The framed photo of his father, Amos, grinned from the wall, a reminder of the promise Colt had kept, to hold the land, no matter the cost. His mother's absence, a wound from childhood cancer, felt sharper now, her hymns echoing in the quiet. Colt poured a mug, the steam curling like a ghost, and stepped back outside, where the cattle lowed in the distance, their numbers dwindled, but still his. Sarah emerged from the barn, her dark braid loose, her duffel slung over one shoulder. She'd been up since they'd limped back from the canyon, coordinating with a journalist friend to leak the evidence. Deeds, photos, the flash drive that named Sheriff Delgado and his cronies. Her face was tired but fierce, a woman who'd lost her brother's farm to the scheme and found a fight bigger than herself. "Paperwork's done," she said, stopping beside him. "Feds are moving on Delgado's crew. Your ranch is clear." Colt nodded, the reward check heavy in his pocket. "Couldn't have done it without you," he said, the words awkward but true. Their alliance, forged in gunfire and shared wounds, had grown into something deeper, a trust that teetered on the edge of more. Her touch in the mine, her steady hands binding his wounds, lingered in his mind, a spark he wasn't ready to name. Sarah's eyes softened, but her jaw tightened. "I'm heading to El Paso," she said, voice low. "Brother's there, needs me. The fight's not over. More ranches, more victims. I gotta keep pushing." Colt's chest ached, a quiet loss. He wanted her to stay, to see if the spark could grow, but his cowboy code, let people ride their own trail, held him back. "You don't have to go alone," he said, testing the waters, his voice rougher than he meant. She smiled, bittersweet. "You've got your fight here, Colt. This land, this life, it's you." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his, a fleeting warmth. "But if you ever ride through El Paso..." The hint of romance hung unspoken, a possibility for another day. Colt nodded, swallowing the urge to ask her to stay. "Keep that gun handy," he said, forcing a grin. "And don't trust no badges." Sarah laughed, a sound that eased the ache, and headed for her borrowed truck, leaving Colt with a pang of what might have been. The ranch wasn't empty long. A dust cloud announced a visitor, and Jimmy Ruiz's battered Ford pulled up, the man himself stepping out with a face like a kicked dog. Colt's hand clenched, Jimmy's betrayal in the mine still raw. His tip to Delgado had nearly gotten them killed. "You got nerve showing up," Colt said, voice cold, stepping off the porch. Jimmy stopped, hat in hand, eyes down. "I messed up, boss," he said, voice breaking. "Sheriff offered cash, said it was just for the girl. I needed it. My kid's sick, hospital bills. I didn't know they'd come for you." The confession hit hard, a mix of anger and pity. Colt's pride screamed to cut Jimmy loose, but his journey had taught him something about flaws, about second chances. His father had forgiven worse, holding the ranch through lean years by trusting men who'd stumbled. "You broke my trust," Colt said, voice low. "That don't mend easy." "I know," Jimmy said, meeting his eyes. "Let me work it off. No pay, just labor. I owe you." Colt hesitated, the conflict tearing at him. Forgiving Jimmy meant risking another betrayal, but cutting him off meant losing a piece of the ranch's heart. "One chance," he said finally, voice hard. "Step wrong, you're gone." Jimmy nodded, relief flooding his face, and headed to the barn, his boots kicking up dust. The repair was fragile, a start, but it shifted Colt's perspective. Relationships, like the land, needed work to hold. The town had changed too. Colt drove into Presidio later, the neon signs, Lone Star Beer, Tacos El Rey, flickering as always, but the air was different. At the Longhorn Bar, Rosa slid him a beer, her smile wide. "Heard you took down Delgado," she said, pride in her voice. "Folks are calling you a hero, mijo." "Ain't no hero," Colt muttered, but the words rang hollow. The barflies, once whispering about the McGraw's fall, raised glasses his way, their respect unexpected and heavy. Even Trey Ballard, nursing a black eye from their fight, gave a grudging nod from the corner. The code, do right, fight hard, had held even in the dark, and Presidio saw it. Back at the ranch, Colt walked the fence line, the reward money enough to pay the bank and buy feed, maybe a few head of cattle. The land stretched before him, mesquite and hardpan, but it wasn't just dirt anymore. It was his fight, his growth, a mirror of the man he'd become. He'd been stubborn, isolated, but facing Delgado, trusting Sarah, forgiving Jimmy. He'd learned to bend without breaking. The ranch was safe, but the scheme's fallout lingered. Carver, The feed store owner tied to his father's ruin was still out there, named in Sarah's evidence but untouchable for now. The feds were digging, but Colt knew men like Carver didn't fall easy.
Whoa! He stopped at a broken fence post, the wood splintered from years of neglect. His father's voice echoed, "Fix what's broke, son." Colt grabbed a hammer and nails from the barn, his hands steady despite the pain in his thigh. Each strike was deliberate, a small action tying him to the land, to the man he was becoming. The sun dipped low, painting the desert in fire, and Colt paused, sweat beading on his brow. The ranch was his, earned through blood and truth, but the fight wasn't over. Carver, the cartel trail they'd crossed, the weight of Sarah's absence. He'd changed, but the road ahead was still rough. Colt looked out, the cattle grazing under a wide sky, and felt a flicker of peace. He'd set out to save the land, but he'd found something bigger, a purpose, a code that held even when the world turned dark. He drove a final nail, the sound sharp in the quiet, and whispered, "I'm still here, Dad." The ranch stood, and so did he, a cowboy grappling with his transformation, ready for whatever came next. Dawn of a new ride. The McGraw ranch woke under a dawn that spilled gold across the Chihuahuan desert, its rays catching the mesquite and painting the cracked earth with hope. Colt McGraw stood in the corral, his boots sunk in dust, a new horse, a young bay named Ember, snorting under his hand. His arm was still bandaged, his thigh scarred from a bullet graze, and his wallet was as thin as the day he'd started, but the ranch was his, saved by a $50,000 reward for exposing the land-grabbing scheme. The bank's noose was gone, but Colt was different now, his stubborn pride softened by sacrifice, his isolation broken by trust. He'd faced corrupt sheriffs, lost his father's horse, and forgiven a traitor, learning that being a cowboy wasn't just surviving, it was living. "I set out to make a living," he murmured, patting Ember's flank. "Ended up finding a life." Presidio's neon-lit streets and the rodeo's roar felt distant, though they were part of him, etched like scars. The ranch, 200 acres of his father's legacy, stretched before him, its fence lines straighter now, thanks to the reward money and his own sweat. The house, sagging but standing, smelled of coffee and leather, a haven where his mother's hymns and his father's laugh lingered in memory. Colt's journey, chases, betrayals, Sarah's fire, had redefined him. He wasn't the cowboy who'd ignored bank notices, driving Uber to scrape by, too proud to bend. He'd embraced vulnerability, faced his flaws, and found a purpose bigger than survival. To hold the land, not just for himself, but for what it meant. Roll. The corral gate creaked, and Jimmy Ruiz stepped through, his hat low, carrying a bucket of feed. Their reconciliation was fresh, a fragile bridge rebuilt after Jimmy's betrayal in the mine, when he'd tipped off Sheriff Delgado for cash. Colt had given him a second chance, a nod to his father's belief in redemption. But trust was a slow mend. "Morning, boss," Jimmy said, voice cautious. "Ember's looking strong. You riding her and Marfa?" "Maybe," Colt said, scratching the horse's ear. The rodeo loomed next weekend, a chance to win purses and rebuild the herd. But it wasn't the desperate gamble it once was. "You checked the north fence?" "Fixed it at dawn," Jimmy said, setting the bucket down. He hesitated, then met Colt's eyes. "I know I ain't earned it yet, but thanks for keeping me on." Colt nodded, the words heavy. "Earn it every day," he said, voice firm but not cold. The act of forgiveness, small but deliberate, showed his growth. Pride hadn't won, not this time. Jimmy tipped his hat and headed to the barn, leaving Colt with the quiet of the ranch, a peace he hadn't known a week ago. The reward had bought feed, a few head of cattle and Ember, but it hadn't erased the scheme's shadow. Hank Carver, the feed store owner tied to the developers who'd targeted Colt's ranch, was still free. His name in Sarah's evidence, but untouchable without more proof. The feds were sniffing, but Carver's kind slithered through cracks, like the men who'd pushed his father, Amos, into a bad deal that hastened his death.
Colt's fingers tightened on the reins, a final conflict brewing. Expand the ranch, rebuild its glory, or chase Carver, risking new enemies to settle an old score. He led Ember to the barn, the scent of hay and leather grounding him. A letter on the tackroom table caught his eye. Postmarked El Paso, Sarah's handwriting sharp and sure. She'd left for her brother, her fight against the scheme ongoing, but her words in the dawn had lingered. If you ever ride through El Paso. Colt opened it, his heart kicking up. Colt, it read, you gave me a shot when I had none. I'm digging deeper, but this isn't goodbye. Find me when you're ready. Sarah. A phone number was scrawled below, a lifeline to a woman who'd fought beside him, her touch and fire a spark he couldn't shake. He tucked the letter in his pocket, the possibility of love a risk he wasn't brave enough for. Yet, his journey had taught him vulnerability, but taking that leap meant bearing a heart he'd guarded since his mother's death. Still, Sarah's fight was his, tied to the land, to redemption. He'd call her, maybe ride to El Paso, but first he had to settle things here. Colt walked to the house, the porch groaning under his boots. Inside, he pulled a photo from the wall, him and Amos, branding calves under a wide sky. I kept it, Dad, he said, voice rough, making peace with his past. The wound of his parents' loss, cancer for his mother, a heart attack for his father, was softer now, not gone, but bearable. He'd failed them once, selling half the herd but saving the ranch, fighting for others like Sarah, was redemption, a cowboy's kind. The town called later, Presidio's streets buzzing with news of Delgado's arrest. Colt drove in, the neon signs, Lone Star beer, Tacos El Rey, flickering like old friends. At the Longhorn bar, Rosa slid him a plate of nachos, her smile warm. You're the talk of the town, mijo, she said. Folks saying you're Amos reborn. Colt shook his head, but the respect, barflies nodding, a rancher tipping his hat, settled heavy. Even Trey Ballard, bruised from their fight, raised a glass from across the room, a grudging truce. The code, do right, fight hard, had held, and Colt's transformation shone in their eyes. No longer just a broke cowboy, but a man who'd stood tall. Back at the ranch, Colt faced his final choice. The reward could buy more land, expand the spread, make it what Amos dreamed. But Carver's shadow loomed, a lingering enemy tied to his father's ruin. Chasing him meant stirring a hornet's nest, cartel ties, dirty money, risks to the ranch he'd fought for. Colt walked the fence line, Ember trailing, and stopped at a post he'd fixed days ago, its wood solid under his hand. Expansion was safe, a future for the land. Carver was justice, a debt to his past. His growth, embracing vulnerability, learning to bend, tipped the scale. He'd build the ranch, make it strong, but he'd keep Sarah's number, watch for Carver, fight when the time came. A cowboy didn't just charge, he planned. The sun dipped, fire on the horizon, and Colt saddled Ember, the horse's strength a mirror of his own. He rode out, hooves soft on the hardpan, the ranch stretching vast and his. The cattle grazed, the barn stood, and the house held memories he no longer ran from. He paused at the lookout, where he'd once stared at the ranch, bank notices crushing him. Now it was his, earned through sacrifice, redeemed by truth. Sarah's letter warmed his pocket, a promise of connection if he dared. He'd call her tomorrow, take that risk, but tonight was for the land. Colt dismounted, letting Ember graze, and sat on a rock. The desert quiet save for a coyote's yip. The stars burned bright, a canvas his mother had loved, his father had fought under. He'd been broke, beat up, proud to a fault, but he'd found a life, not just surviving, but living for something bigger. The fight wasn't over. Carver, the scheme's echoes, but Colt was ready, a cowboy redefined by pride tempered, sacrifice honored, redemption claimed. He stood, brushing dust from his Stetson, and looked to the ranch, its silhouette strong against the dawn's first light. A new day was coming, and Colt McGraw, scarred but whole, would ride to meet it.
A quiet, horseback journey under a wide sky, carrying him forward, always forward.
If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe to the Cowboy Chronicles YouTube channel. We feature Western-inspired content regularly. You can also visit us on Facebook for more content. Thanks for watching.